Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we are taking a major step back to look at something really fascinating. We're going to objectively map out this surprisingly complex space where abstract philosophy crashes right into biological reality, specifically the animal rights debate. We're going to draw directly from foundational philosophical texts and hard scientific data to see exactly how our understanding of animal welfare has evolved and, what it actually means for us today.
Okay, let's ground all this abstract philosophy with a really simple, common-sense question. Why do we instinctively know it's wrong to kick a dog for fun? I mean, pretty much everyone, regardless of their background, agrees that doing that is morally unacceptable. But exactly why it's unacceptable, well, that is where the philosophy diverges. And honestly, it's the absolute key to understanding everything else we're going to talk about today.
So historically, philosophers kind of split into two camps here. On the left side, you've got the traditional indirect duty view. This argues that kicking a dog is wrong mostly because it damages human property, or maybe because it just fosters cruelty in us humans, making us more likely to mistreat each other. In that view, the dog itself isn't really the primary concern. But contrasted against that on the right is the concept of direct moral status. This view says, actually, the dog's own welfare matters completely independently of humans. The act is wrong simply because it needlessly harms the dog directly.
So here is our roadmap for the explainer. We'll start with the moral status question, move into defining animal rights, dive into the science of sentience, understand animal harm, and then finally confront the factory farming reality. Let's get right into it.
First up, Section 1, the moral status question. To really get where we are today, we need to trace the historical evolution of how we actually view animals.
It's actually wild how radically our views have shifted over the centuries. In ancient Greece, Aristotle just flat-out dismissed animals as lacking reason, basically saying they existed just to serve humans. Fast forward to the 17th century, and René Descartes takes this even further. Get this, he literally viewed animals as mechanical, unfeeling, organic machines. He thought an animal's cries were just the sound of biological gears grinding, with zero conscious feeling. No way, right? But then, a total game changer hit in the 19th century when Charles Darwin demonstrated the evolutionary continuity between humans and animals, proving our differences are mostly in degree, not in kind. And that laid the crucial groundwork for the 1970s, where cognitive ethology and the modern animal liberation movement really took off.
And that evolution in thought brings us exactly to where modern philosophy largely stands today. Bringing it back to that dog-kicking example, cruelty is wrong because of the harm done to the animal itself. Period. It's not just about property damage anymore. Modern ethics generally recognizes that the animal is the direct subject of the wrong, which firmly establishes their direct moral status.
All right, moving on to Section 2, defining animal rights. Now that we've established they have moral status, we have to deconstruct what having rights actually means here. Philosophers usually break this down into a sort of three-tiered ladder, moving from the broadest idea to the absolute strictest. Step 1 is the moral status sense. This just broadly means animals must be treated well for their own sake. Step 2 bumps it up a notch to the equal consideration sense. This argues that a human's and an animal's comparable interests carry the exact same moral weight. So a cow's interest in not feeling pain matters just as much as a human's interest in not feeling pain. Finally, Step 3 is the utility trumping sense. This strictly argues that an animal's vital interests are protected absolutely, regardless of whatever social or economic benefit we humans might get from ignoring them.
So this leaves ethicists and frankly all of us with two primary frameworks for weighing these tricky ethical choices. On one side, you've got the equal consideration framework. This dictates that animal suffering matters exactly as much as comparable human suffering. No species gets a free pass when it comes to pain. But on the other side, we have the sliding scale model. In this view, humans get full moral consideration, while animals get proportionally less consideration based on how cognitively or socially complex they are. Ethicists are constantly debating between these two camps to figure out our exact obligations.
Which brings us to Section 3, the science of sentience. Because before we can pick a framework, we need to examine the actual biological evidence of animal minds.
Now this is absolutely crucial. To understand animal minds, biology says we have to separate a simple biological reflex from actual conscious suffering. Think of a plant shrinking away from a flame. That's nociception. It's basically the plumbing of pain, just a non-conscious detection of something harmful. Sentience, though, is the whole shebang. Sentience is the capacity to actually have conscious feelings, to experience subjective sensations like pain, and to have real emotional states like fear or profound anxiety.
And the scientific consensus here is backed by 4 massive pillars of evidence, proving that vertebrate animals absolutely do experience genuine conscious pain. First, we have behavioral evidence. They actively favor injured limbs or avoid things that hurt. Second, physiological. They literally share our vertebrate neuroanatomy and central nervous systems. Third, the functional evolutionary perspective. Pain serves as a necessary, learned motivation to keep them alive. And finally, their response to analgesics. Just like if you or I went to the hospital, giving an injured animal a painkiller successfully changes their behavior, which proves they're experiencing actual conscious relief from suffering.
All right, Section 4, Understanding Animal Harm. Building on that biology, we have to look at how we can negatively impact animal well-being.
When we categorize harm, we're basically looking at 3 distinct realities. We have suffering, which covers those highly unpleasant emotional states from pain or fear. Then there is confinement, which means severe external constraints that basically stop an animal from doing normal species-typical behaviors. And finally, death, the ultimate harm of prematurely cutting off all the future experiences life would afford. Now, while philosophers might debate whether a human death carries more weight because of our complex long-term goals, suffering itself is a very readily comparable harm across species.
And that brings us to our final section, Section 5, the factory farming reality. It is time to apply these moral frameworks to modern agriculture.
When you take these theories and apply them to the real world of modern factory farming, well, the reality is stark. The source text documents how this institution operates at a sheer scale designed purely for economic efficiency. It routinely causes massive harm, fundamentally treating sentient beings not as creatures with moral status, but literally just as cogs in a machine engineered to absolutely maximize profit.
Let's actually map out those 3 harms we just defined onto documented agricultural reality. For a hen, confinement means a wire battery cage where she literally cannot stretch her wings, leading to profound suffering and culminating in a fully conscious death. For a highly intelligent hog, confinement in a tiny slatted pen leads to suffering like unanesthetized tail docking, ending in a slaughter process where stunning frequently fails. And for a cow, confinement in a crowded dry lot where her calf is immediately taken away leads to chronic issues like mastitis, ending in a death process that is often terrifying and conscious.
But to put this all into perspective, you really have to look at the scale. 100 million. That is the number of mammals killed annually by American factory farms alone. And that's functioning alongside the slaughter of roughly 5 billion birds. Billion with a B. The absolute magnitude of this system means we are not talking about isolated incidents here. We are examining an industrialized, standardized reality.
But here is the really interesting part where everything kind of comes together. The philosophy and the data create a striking consensus. Even if you completely reject equal consideration, and even if you adopt that sliding scale model where human interests securely come first, the massive, unnecessary harm inflicted by factory farming simply cannot be philosophically defended. Both major sides of the ethical debate actually converge right here. So, as we wrap up this explainer, I want to leave you with a provocative thought to ponder regarding your own moral compass. Which framework makes the most sense to you? Equal consideration or the sliding scale? And maybe more importantly, how do your daily choices, right down to the food on your plate, align with the scientific and philosophical realities we've mapped out together today? Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer, and keep asking those big questions.